Layla ran. Branches whipped at her face. Thorns tore at her clothes. Her lungs burned, desperate for air. But fear lent speed to her feet. She had to keep running. The forest floor was a treacherous maze of roots and shadows. Each one seemed to twist and writhe, reaching for her ankles. The darkness was alive, closing in. A sob caught in her throat. She couldn't remember how long she'd been running. Hours. Days. Time had no meaning in this endless, suffocating darkness. The only sound louder than her ragged breathing was the pounding of her own heart. It hammered in her chest, a frantic drumbeat urging her onward. Don't stop. Never stop. A shape loomed out of the darkness, its form barely discernible against the inky blackness of the forest. The air was thick with tension, every rustle of leaves amplifying the sense of dread. Layla stumbled to a halt, her heart nearly bursting from the exertion and fear. She had been running for what felt like hours, the forest seeming to close in around her with every step. It was a cabin, small and dilapidated. The wood was rotten, almost black in the moonlight. It looked like it hadn't been touched by human hands in years, maybe decades. A single window, dark and empty, stared back at her like a vacant eye. It was as if the cabin itself was watching her, waiting for her next move. The sight should have been welcoming after the relentless darkness of the forest. But it wasn't. Instead, it filled her with an even deeper sense of unease. Something felt wrong. On the rough-hewn door, someone had painted letters in a chilling crimson red. The paint looked fresh, as if it had been applied only moments before she arrived. They dripped down the wood like drops of blood. Layla couldn't bring herself to read them. The words seemed to pulse with a life of their own, a sinister warning she didn't need to understand. She didn't need to. This place screamed danger. Every instinct in her body told her to turn and run, to get as far away from this cursed cabin as possible. A low growl rumbled through the trees, seeming to emanate from the cabin itself. It was a sound that sent chills down her spine, a primal warning that she was not alone. Layla backed away, her eyes darting to the shadows. She couldn't stay here. She had to keep moving. The forest was dangerous, but staying near the cabin felt like a death sentence. She turned and ran, the darkness swallowing her once more. As she turned to flee, a memory flashed through her mind. She was back in the safety of her own room, laughing with her friends. They were huddled around a flickering candle, telling spooky stories. "There's a legend," whispered Emma, her eyes wide, "about a cabin in the woods. They say it's haunted by the ghost of people who disappeared there." "Don't be ridiculous," scoffed Daniel, but Layla could see the flicker of unease in his eyes. "There's no such thing as ghosts." But even as he spoke, a cold shiver ran down Layla's spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them from the shadows. Layla stumbled into a clearing, and another wave of dizziness washed over her. In the center stood a solitary oak, its bare branches twisting towards the sky like skeletal fingers. And beneath it lay something that made her blood run cold, a mirror. It was tall and ornate, with a silver frame tarnished black with age. It seemed to pulse with an unnatural light, drawing Layla towards it. She couldn't look away. Hesitantly, she reached out and touched the cold, smooth surface. Her reflection stared back at her, but it wasn't quite right. Her eyes were wider, wilder. Her skin was paler, almost translucent, and behind her, lurking in the depths of the reflection, was a shape. It was dark and indistinct, but undeniably there, watching her. Watching. Terror lent her strength. She tore her gaze from the mirror, her heart pounding in her chest, but it was too late. The shadow was no longer confined to the reflection. It was here, in the real world. It rose from the base of the oak, a swirling vortex of darkness. It had no eyes, no mouth, but Layla could feel its malevolence, its hunger. It was reaching for her, its touch promising unimaginable cold and oblivion. A scream caught in her throat, choked off by fear. She stumbled back, her hand connecting with something hard and cold. The mirror, her fingers closed around a shard of the broken frame, sharp and jagged. It was her only chance. Section 6. Shattered glass, shattered nerves. With a strength born of desperation, Layla brought the shard of glass down on the mirror's surface. A high-pitched shriek pierced the night as the glass shattered, the sound echoing through the silent trees. The mirror's surface cracked and spiderwebbed, the pieces falling away like shattered ice. The shadow writhed and thrashed, its form flickering as if caught in a dying flame. Then, with a final, ear-splitting shriek, it vanished. Layla collapsed to her knees, her chest heaving. The shard of glass clattered to the ground, forgotten. She was safe. For now. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that by breaking the mirror, she had unleashed something far worse. Section 7. Flight through the trees. Layla didn't waste any time. She scrambled to her feet and plunged back into the undergrowth, her lungs burning, her legs screaming for respite, but she couldn't stop. Not now, not ever. The forest seemed to press in around her, the trees closing ranks like conspirators in her terror. The branches snagged at her clothes, the thorns tore at her skin. But she didn't care. Pain was a small price to pay for escape. She had to get out of this forest. She had to find help. But who would believe her story? Who would believe that she had seen a mirror come to life, a shadow reach out to claim her? Section 8. Headlights in the distance. Just when her hope began to dwindle, a beacon pierced the darkness. Layla had been wandering for hours, her feet aching and her mind clouded with fear. The forest seemed endless, a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. She had almost given up, resigned to the cold embrace of the night. Headlights, two brilliant beams sliced through the trees, growing closer by the second. A car. Salvation. Her heart raced as she watched the lights approach, a mix of hope and dread filling her chest. Could this be her way out, or was it another danger lurking in the dark? Layla burst out of the trees and onto the asphalt, waving her arms frantically. Her voice cracked as she shouted for help, the sound swallowed by the vast, empty night. She had to make them see her, had to make them stop. The car screeched to a halt, its headlights blinding her. She shielded her eyes, squinting to see who was inside. The sudden stop sent a cloud of dust into the air, making her cough. Through the windshield, she could see the silhouette of a figure behind the wheel. The shape was indistinct, but there was no mistaking the presence of another human being. Relief washed over her, but it was tinged with caution. A man. Tall and broad-shouldered, his features obscured by the darkness. He seemed imposing, a guardian or a threat, she couldn't tell. Her instincts screamed at her to be careful, but she had no other options. He lowered the window and Layla could hear the rumble of the engine. The sound was oddly comforting, a reminder of civilization in the midst of the wilderness. She took a tentative step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. He spoke, his voice a low growl. "What are you doing out here at this hour?" His tone was gruff, but not unkind. Layla hesitated, her mind racing with possible responses. Could she trust him? She had no choice. "What are you doing out here at this hour?" Layla hesitated. Could she trust him? She had no choice. Her voice trembled as she replied, "I got lost. Please, I need help." "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse with exhaustion and terror. "Help me." The man studied her for a moment, his eyes unreadable in the dim light. Finally he nodded, unlocking the passenger door. Layla's knees nearly buckled with relief as she reached for the handle. Section 9. Stranger's Mercy. The man studied her for a moment, his gaze unwavering. His eyes, dark and intense, seemed to pierce through the night. Assessing her every move, Layla held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the weight of his stare, a silent interrogation that made her skin crawl. What was he thinking? Could he see the terror that clawed at her insides, the fear that clung to her like a shroud? Her mind raced with questions, each one more frantic than the last. Finally, he sighed and leaned across the passenger seat, pushing the door open. The creak of the door seemed to echo in the stillness of the night. "Get in," he said, gruffly. "It's not safe out here." His voice was rough, but there was an urgency in his tone that made her believe him. Relief washed over Layla, so potent it nearly buckled her knees. She had been so close to giving up hope, and now a lifeline had been thrown her way. She didn't hesitate. She scrambled into the car, slamming the door behind her. The sound of the door closing was like a barrier between her and the unknown dangers outside. As the man put the car in gear and pulled back onto the road, Layla stole a glance at his face in the dim light of the dashboard. The shadows played tricks, making it hard to read his expression. He wasn't smiling. His expression was unreadable, his eyes dark and unfathomable. It was as if he was hiding something, a secret that she wasn't privy to. Layla couldn't shake the feeling that she had traded one nightmare for another. The uncertainty gnawed at her, making her question her decision. But as the car sped away from the forest, leaving the darkness behind, a small, desperate hope flickered within her. The further they drove, the more the oppressive weight of the forest seemed to lift. Maybe, just maybe, she was wrong. Perhaps this stranger with his unreadable eyes and gruff demeanor was her unexpected savior. Only time would tell.